So as they make their way up, this is the panel on the future of digital humanitarianism. And I think Dr. Nolene Heiser has really put us in good stead, where she talks about how we should be using technology, right, in service of humanity. So I think that's going to be the focus of our discussion. How can we scale up digital tools today so that we can be in service of good, so that those who are in need, who don't have access, right, to some of the important humanitarian assistance, may be able to receive that. So that's part of impact. We also talk about sustainability. How can we ensure that whatever digital tools that are created stays on, right, and continues to be invested? And the third is on resilience. How can we anticipate unintended consequences? So with that, I'm going to introduce my fellow panelists. So first I have Dave. So Dave is the Director of Crisis Readiness, Response and Recovery at UNDP. During his tenure at UNDP, he has had several leadership positions. But before that, he also worked with the UN mission in East Timor, as well as the UN mission in Kosovo. Ms. Lynette in pink, she's our space lady. So she is the CEO and chairwoman of Space Faculty. Not only does she champion the Asia Deep Tech ecosystem, but she is also a Carmen Fellow, an international award recognizing individuals for outstanding achievements in space. Next to her is Nama. So Nama has flown all the way, and he'll be sharing his experience on how open mapping and digital innovation can equip us to respond effectively to crisis. He's currently the Regional Director of Open Mapping Hub, and he's also founded and developed the Kathmandu Living Labs as one of the exemplary institutions working in the areas of open mapping. And last but not least, we have Swati with us. She's the Global Security Lead at Uber, and she oversees the end-to-end management of a 24/7 intelligence-driven security function. But she's also here to share with us how we can shape better decisions and not just react to crisis. So we're going to start off our discussion by looking at how digital tech can adapt to evolving crisis. And the first question I'm going to pose will be to Dave. But I also just want to give a logistics point, which is that what we would do here today is a fireside chat. So please zoom into Pigeonhole and put in your questions at any point in time, and then I'll draw these questions in as we go. Yeah. So over to Dave. The question I have for you is, given the increasing frequency and complexity of humanitarian crisis, how can we use digital tools to leverage and better anticipate and prepare for such a crisis before they escalate?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for me to be here in this forum, and thank you for inviting me. I think the topics under discussion, including the focus of the forum, is extremely topical given what the humanitarian architecture is going through and how it is evolving. In terms of addressing the question, I think within the humanitarian peace development nexus, anticipation and prevention is extremely critical, because the better you are able to anticipate, prevent, and mitigate risks, you are able to also reduce the humanitarian caseload. You're also able to accelerate the transition from relief to recovery. In this regard, digital tools are reshaping and reimagining how humanitarian action is taking place. But I still think that we are only scratching the surface in terms of what these tools are able to provide, and there's lots of scope to build and expand more. So let me give you two examples where UNDP is using digital tools for enhancing anticipation and prevention. So one is crisis risk dashboards. This is something, a tool that UNDP has deployed in around 30 countries. This is a tool that is for the UN system. It's not only for UNDP, but we build and basically deploy it. We also have a couple of regional crisis risk dashboards, for instance, one covering Sahel and one for Southeast Asia, etc. What these crisis response dashboards do is they pull together contextual data, so data like population, GDP, HDI, etc., combine it with some of the events-based databases like ACLED, which monitors violence, as well as Uppsala database for conflict, So there's a combination of both of this, plus real-time monitoring of, for instance, hate speech in terms of tensions. And this data is then cleaned, synthesized, and visualized for identification of risks, monitoring of hotspots, for programmatic options, etc. The UN system also has qualitative data on the ground in terms of, we have peace and development advisors, for example, one of the positions that do lots of political analytics. So we pull all of this information together, and these crisis risk dashboards allows the UN system to have contextual awareness. It supports programmatic planning, it supports strategic engagement, as well as it supports early warning and early action. An example would be if you identify potential for electoral violence based on some of these data in certain geographical areas, then you are able to deploy programmatic solutions. The challenge is that metadata, or to say a country is going to have some time of risks, is not very useful. You need to have to be geographically bring it down and narrow it down to have programmatic options. Now we are incorporating, for instance, a large language model to the crisis risk dashboards. So it allows interaction on basic human language, but also to get, for instance, programmatic crisis response as well as anticipatory action based on this data that is only available within the crisis risk dashboards. This is UN data, but we are sharing it. The German Federal Foreign Office, the US State Department, a few entities are using it in specialized manner with special requests and permission from us. So this is one example of how we are using crisis risk dashboards. The second area is, for instance, predictive analytics. I think this is where also that in terms of anticipation and prevention that the UN system is moving forward. When it comes to food insecurity, droughts, floods, some of this was mentioned by Dr. Hayes also in her opening remarks and the keynote lecture. Population movements, both refugees and IDPs, based on pull and push factors, all of this is being able to do better through predictive analytics. What predictive analytics does, it helps you run simulation, it helps you pre-positioning, it helps you preparedness. So all of that also allows us to anticipate, respond better, even sometimes cutting the transition from relief to recovery period. Another practical example in Haiti, where we work, it's an urban setting infested by gang violence and almost a failed state kind of a context. We are using drone mapping to identify areas and roads which is blocked by gangs, where you have access limitations, and this drone mapping and geospatial mapping from sat imageries are fed into GeoAI, which is a geospatial image processing tool to identify, for instance, areas in which we can do stabilization programs, which we have to work with the Haitian police or the military. So this allows us to also have security information on where to travel. So again, a lot of this digital and technology is enabling us to take forward our preventive work. So just in closing, just to say that I still think that in terms of anticipation and prevention, the digital tools needs to be connected to organizational standard operating procedures, which is a big weakness. There are lots of organizations have strong SOPs when it comes to respond and recovery, so we are very good at sudden onset crisis and how we work with it. But when you have this kind of data and analytics to do anticipation and prevention, when risks are triggered, how does the organization adapt? How do we respond? That's something I think is lacking in many organizations. So we have rolled out now, we have a response standard operating procedures. We have included, for instance, a prevention and anticipation protocol to that. So we have a system by that if some of these risks are elevated, how does the organization respond? And some of this data is also done together with Inform Early Warning, which is part of OCHA, and other organizations are part of it. So I'll stop there, thanks.
Thanks very much, Dave. You shared both in terms of the crisis risk dashboard, so please check out the UNDP dashboard that they have. as well on the predictability, analytics, and how they can prepare responses. And one of the things that we face in the work that we do as HD in addressing conflict is looking at what you said, the monitoring of the hate speech, right? Because in conflict these days, you know, when misinformation, disinformation goes awry, right, it's very hard for peacemakers to say, actually, let's talk peace, let's find a way to de-escalate, because your domestic audience is so riled up. And it also makes it very difficult for politicians and leaders to want to do the right thing, you know, for concern of how they might be seen by their own domestic audience as well. So maybe one question to think about later is, how do we manage this? Right now that we have this information, as you said, being able to monitor hate speech, how do we address it? So now I'm going to turn the question to Nama. We've been talking about digital solutions, but at the same time, we recognize that there are those who don't necessarily have access because they're displaced, they're living in remote areas. How do we ensure that they are not left behind?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's a great honor to be here. Before I respond to your question, I would like to begin by giving a bit of context of my work so that you can situate my response in that broader context. Me and my organization does what you call mapping. Dave, you touched upon that geospatial mapping. That's the line of work I do. I don't need to explain the value of map because I think we all know that, because map is such an effective visual tool that we can see things that otherwise we cannot see. So I don't want to spend my time there. So let me jump into the nature of the work we do. So mapping is nothing new. We've been doing mapping throughout centuries in history. But the kind of mapping that we have been doing traditionally does have a couple of problems, and that very nicely resonates to what our keynote speakers spoke in the morning. That these maps are generally top-down. Some external agencies map your community, your village, or your city. As a result, what is reflected in the map is not the need of the local people or community, is somebody's need, somebody's perception, somebody's view. That's problematic. So kind of mapping we do is what we call open and participatory mapping. So we call it open street map. It's like a Wikipedia map. A map where anybody can contribute their local knowledge. The fact that every individual knows about their community. Everybody knows something, and nobody knows everything. In fact, so, even the illiterate villager knows the geography of that village much better than us. That knowledge is sitting within that individuals. But how can we leverage technology to bring that knowledge and make it available to the rest of the world, including the responders, is a fascinating question that drives our work, my work. So that's the kind of mapping we do. So a map where anybody can contribute, anybody can improve the map, because knowledge is imperfect. Somebody maps a road. You put a road, and another person adds the name of the road. The third person says whether the road is one-way or two-way. That's how we develop the map incrementally, leveraging the knowledge of individuals in communities. So I mentioned this because your question connects to this. Now the question is, how can we make sure that we include these people? As I said, that's exactly why we've been doing this mapping, because it empowers people, because it's open, and there is opportunity for people to participate. A closed system inherently excludes people. An open system has a chance. It doesn't ensure, but there's a greater chance to include to include people. But when you talk about inclusion, in the digital space, what are we talking about? Digital space is so fast. There's a wide range of technology. But because I've been working in mapping, let me share my experience. So we need to think at the two levels, the inclusion at the product level and the inclusion in the process level. So in mapping, including people, including communities, means that community is there on the map. That means the community is now visible to anybody, because if your community, if your village, if your certain geographic features that's missing from the map, that certainly becomes invisible to the eyes of decision makers, policy makers, first responders, and all humanitarian actors. So that's why map is so important. Being able to put a certain community in the village, or even in the cities, there are certain communities. I've worked in the slum communities, for example, mapping slums. Usually those sort of communities are excluded from the mapping, from the commercial mapping, because there is very little incentive for commercial mapping, to include them, because there's very little business. We try to make sure that all these communities where otherwise would be excluded are there in the map. Thus, the end product is a map where all these communities, are represented. They are not missed. Now, I can map a community without including the community themselves. They are included in product. But what about the process? As I said at the beginning, it is vital to also include them in the process, because map is a reflection of a mapper's worldview. If they are not in the part of the mapping process, their worldview, their priorities, their needs are not there on the map. That's a problem. So now, what we've been doing, my organization, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team is an organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we advance, we promote this open mapping movement, and we literally call it movement. It's a mapping movement, open mapping movement. So we work in about 90 countries around the world, and we do have regional hubs in different regions, and there is a hub in Asia Pacific. I lead that hub. So we work in about 25 countries, including small island countries. Our organization's goal is from 2020 to 2025 to map area where 1 billion people are living. And we select those areas based on two primary factors. One is multidimensional poverty, and the second factor is risk to natural disaster. So that's our priority. We're mapping those areas. So that's our goal, and we're pretty close to that goal, by the way. That's a product. The process is, our goal is to include 1 million mappers, local mappers, by the way. So we design certain tools, we provide the tools, we give training, we support them, but we really engage local university students, the youth groups, any other community groups as much as possible. Again, I'm not saying what we are doing is perfect. That's the direction we are taking, but there's so much work that needs to be done. I really enjoyed Dr. Hazer's speech, localization. That's exactly where our works get connected. So I stop there, and I hope I will have opportunity to add more.
Great, thank you. I mean, it's really exciting to see 1 million locals joining the mapping that you are doing. And in fact, your points have gotten some questions, and I've just put one out here, which is, how does open mapping prevent duplication with other mapping giants? And related to that, how do you depoliticize mapping, since there's some sensitivities with geographies as well?
You want me to respond now? Now, that's a very exciting question. Thank you, whoever asked that question. Well, the duplication, So this whole mapping phenomena was started in 2004, by the way. And I did have, this is, by the way, if you're interested, this is simply a website, www.openstreetmap.org. Just go there. That's what I'm talking about. And that's, I would claim, that's one of the biggest open database of geospatial mapping in the world. This is open. Anybody has access to this map. This is like Wikipedia. Anybody can download an entire data set. It's free. Okay? So, now the duplication. That's a, now this space is getting very complicated, I must tell that. So many commercial companies, in fact, use the data we produce because it's open. So you say there is some copyright, I mean, you cannot download data, sell to other people. It's Creative Commons license, so you have to give credit. But because it's free and open access, many commercial companies just sit, at the side and this is download, use that map as a base map, and even UN systems use it, World Bank use it. I think it's in many cases it's like a default map. People use this generally as a starting point and then improve it. They add their own data on top of that and do a variety of analysis. So duplication, because these are two different kinds of things. The proprietary maps, you don't have access to data. So let me not take any name of any mapping company, because they keep data. You can access map, say Google Map, for example. You can see map, but you cannot download raw data because data is money, and Google, and by very nature of the company, private companies don't allow you to download the raw data. It's just a map, no data, no access to data, right? Whereas the kind of map data we produce is very different. You can download raw data, okay? You can filter, if you need only the road networks for a certain country, for a certain region, or for a certain city, you just filter the data, and then use for your purpose. So I think there's not really, I would say not really duplication, because one is completely open, the other is protected, closed, proprietary, right? So that's how I would respond to that question. But the spirit of the question is that how can we coordinate better between the OpenStreetMap and the private mappers, or even the government mapping agencies? Every country does have a mapping agencies, national mapping agencies. How can we coordinate better? I know some governments, use OpenStreetMap as a base map. For example, what they do is, if a government does have a data for a certain city, they upload their data to OpenStreetMap and ask citizens to update the map, because the government map is already outdated. They mapped 10 years ago. Now it's very expensive for the government to update the data because they have to send lots of people to the field, whereas citizens are already there. They can update this data, certain kind of data. I'm not saying all data, by the way. So there is a space for us for a more effective, better coordination among the different mapping actors. That's a big question. I don't feel confident enough to respond to that question. We need to work on that. But anyway, thank you for asking that good question.
Thank you for educating us on maps. And now I'm going to turn over to Swati. Swati, when you're looking at the issue of diverse digital infrastructure, how can you assure that digital tools are more inclusive, especially if some don't have access to digital infrastructure?
Perfect, thank you. So as someone from the tech space, I'll focus on the build aspect of it, something that Nama had mentioned, the product aspect of it. So inclusion is not just about addressing the digital divide from an access perspective, but also building for absence. So what I mean to say is conflict can occur anywhere. It can occur in a hyper-urbanized area to the most remote villages. So what you need to do when we build those tech solutions is to look for the common denominator, the lowest common denominator. So in most cases, we would assume that there is limited connectivity, limited data literacy, or limited infrastructure that supports data itself. So you build for that. So I'm not saying do not use tech solutions that are complex everywhere. I'm saying use them, but simplify them. I'll give you a simple example. So practically, when you build something, you can build something offline as well, and then later sync it to get the data into a more complicated dashboard online when you have access to it. And you can also use multimodal mediums. You don't always have to depend on an app. You can also use an IVR or an SMS or a phone or something as simple as a bulletin board, right? So you can simplify tech solutions to get what you want. And one of the things that Dr. Hazer mentioned is combine that with local intermediaries so that you have a human interface for tech so that you can add the value of trust in it. Tech in itself does nothing, it's an enabler, but if you have a human interface, it builds trust, which means people would want to engage digitally because people don't trust tech, they trust humans. So essentially, I think one of the best examples for this is the Australian elections. They do a great job of this. So you can go to the polling booth to vote, but you can also send your votes via the post, or you can also pre-poll online. So what it essentially does is tech is accessible to not just people who can go online, but it's also for people who are from remote communities who can't access it or simply won't access it because they don't believe in tech. So you need to build tech that's inclusive from a product perspective that is for people who not only have access to the platforms, but for people who simply can't or won't, right? So the solution has to be for the lowest common denominator and something that is deployable or can be deployed with the least amount of effort, with the most simplified way. So that is how you make it inclusive. So essentially, tech should not just mechanize, but it should also humanize what we are doing.
Point. So tech should humanize what we're doing. And with this, I'm going to turn over to Lynette, right? Just now, Al already talked about how we are seeing less financial support towards humanitarian work. How can we use digital solutions to bridge this gap between shrinking resources and the growing need for humanitarian assistance?
Great. I think this is a really good question. And I think we are looking at a time where people are also very concerned, and rightfully so, about where resources are going to and that it is being put into the right place. Maybe take a step back. So I'm from space faculty, as introduced, and you must be wondering what is a space person doing in a place like this. But what we do at space faculty is, besides nanosatellite building and sending scientific experiments into space, literally, we also advocate the knowledge and know-how of space technology and applications on Earth. In that regard, many space technologies, and now today at the cross-section of buzzword AI, is very useful in predicting. So before a disaster happened, and then during, providing relief during a disaster, and then after, so post-recovery, many space technology tools and applications are applied in these three areas. We were talking about how digital tools and digital transformation can be used in a time of increasing scarcity of resources. And actually that's what digital transformation is about, is providing greater access with as little resources as possible. And so this digital transformation is providing interesting opportunities that we are already seeing. And because it's digital, many sectors are being affected. The space technology, the HADR, consumer technology, logistics. You are also going to see a lot of cross-pollination of applications that can benefit different sectors, such as in HADR. So one of the enablement of digital transformation is in enabling radical efficiency. And that has been alluded before in some of the keynote addresses and with my panelists here, in allowing for hyper-efficiency via greater localization. Because you can see on this panel here, we all have a phone. And in many disaster-prone areas, like it or not, they might not have luxury goods, but many of them would have somebody with a mobile phone. And digital transformation has allowed access to information and aid literally at their fingertips. Some of this enabled via satellite technology. What do I say that? For example, in one of the consumer report, cash and voucher assistance is able to be deployed faster than any aid that we traditionally know. So pushing a cash or pushing voucher through digital token or digital wallet puts money into the end user who is right in the middle of a disaster area. And that technology also allows the merchant to be able to scan, verify, validate information. In fact, such a system in Bangladesh in 2023 allows 36% of people to go less hungry because the money is in their hands. Zooming out again, in the earlier sessions, we talk about the vacillation between trust and distrust, efficiency and inefficiency of large-scale platforms such as the United Nations. No Freudian slip here. Don't read between the lines. Oh my gosh. Okay, let me try to recover. So anyway, I studied in the United States. So the vacillation, but then you see, when we talk about trust, and in our session, when we're having a discussion at the table, actually the conversation should be on the trust of the individuals, because digital transformation is allowing hyper-localization, meaning the power is in the hands of everyone in the conflict. And as we know, right, the person in the conflict is the first responder with the most local context. But sometimes they don't act, or they're not given the authority to act because we don't trust that they will act in the best interest. So this is a very fundamental paradigm shift in the mindset and psychology of human aid. And if that is overcome, we can really unlock tremendous power from digital transformation and increasing radical efficiency via hyper-localization of creating greater access. I'm just going to stop here. I am an engineer by training. I can go on and on about, and a pathological optimist, so I can go on and on about the good use of technology. But I think we have very great conversations coming up, so I'm just going to stop here.
Thanks so much, Lynette. And your example of Bangladesh actually triggered a memory, which was this year during the earthquake in Myanmar, because our team is already based out in country. So they were able to go out even further to the areas where there was no access to humanitarian assistance. And when they did an assessment and they saw what was going on, we pulled together resources very quickly from local communities in Singapore, Thailand, even China, and those financial resources were directed immediately straight into the hands of local communities in Myanmar that were not getting the assistance. And so they could actually use those financial resources to start rebuilding themselves rather than having items which they said they wouldn't know what to do with, but being able to now buy and sell within themselves, right, was also gave them hope, also gave them the sense of empowerment. And I think, Dave, you probably have also examples of how digital humanitarianism has helped this radical effectiveness that Lynette talks about.
Yeah, so thanks. In terms of the funding crunch that we're all talking about, if you look at the humanitarian needs overview as of September, the ask from the UN system is $45 billion, right? And it's currently, 16 billion has been funded. If you compare this to exactly the same point last year, it's almost a 41% drop. So the UN system has lots of NGOs, high NGOs. We are all trying to work more with less, and that's the mantra. And speaking about radical efficiency and how digital is helping us in this realm to bridge the gap, I don't think it's the panacea, it's not, but still, I think it can, one of the contributing factors to bridge the gap between the needs and the funding. So let me give you like 2 examples. One is, I would divide this more into operational, which is more the radical efficiency part of it, and programmatic. So programmatic, lots of people know after sudden onset disasters and crises, we do needs assessments. So one of the needs assessments includes, for instance, building damages. Now, more and more, UNDP has rolled out a Rapida, which is kind of our early recovery needs assessment, which actually uses geospatial technology for identifying damaged houses, buildings, roads, infrastructure, hospitals, etc. How this is done is again using sat imagery. We do get data from UNOSAT, right? We do get satellite imagery from UNOSAT. We have now partnership with Planet, which is one of the largest sat imagery companies. So we get images, and then we use remote sensing and GIS to kind of identify how many buildings are damaged, how many buildings are partially damaged, etc. Now you can integrate artificial intelligence. So using, for instance, Microsoft building footprint data, what is the kind of building material that's gone in to build it? What is the kind of height and width of average buildings? Then we are able to calculate debris. So for instance, we are able to calculate in Gaza currently there's 60 million ton of debris that needs to be cleared. We are also able to use this geospatial technology to identify where debris can be stored. In an urban center like Gaza, there's not space to store it. And in Ukraine, for instance, there are local legislation in terms of where you can store it. Certain kilometers outside from schools, hospitals, etc., it has to be 3 meters above the ground, just in terms of debris management. If you take, so this geospatial data is actually overlaid with GenPop, so you can understand population intensity. There's a database called METIS, which allows us to identify mines and unexploded ordinances. So for instance, if you overlay the debris data with some of this, you understand where some of these challenges are in terms of debris clearance. How does this connect to cost savings? Now, usually we would do the initial damage assessments would be done by human teams. So it takes time. It also takes people. It has security risks. But by using this geospatial technology, we can do this, the initial streamlining and prioritization of access areas where that needs to be ground truth can be done very fast. So if you take 2 weeks to do this kind of a damage assessments or 4 weeks, now we do the SAT assessments in 72 hours, that does save lots of time, and time is money at the end of the day, right? So if you're talking about $45 billion for 365 days, every day that you save, you are reducing the human suffering, and also you are accelerating the transition. So that's one, for instance, on the programmatic side of it. Operational efficiency is also really important. I think there's a lot of, this is the debate, right? Many of us are going to be out of jobs, and maybe that's not a bad thing. But that's the operational efficiency, not only the humanitarian sector, but overall. One of the areas that we work in is we have a deployments mechanism. So for every crisis, we deploy people. These people are drawn from the organization who are pre-surge trained, and we are pre-positioned. So these are surge deployments. We also have expertise, express rosters that we have pulled from the market, who are pre-vetted, trained, quality assured. We can do off-the-shelf recruitment. So we have about, literally around 10,000 people on this platform who are from the external marketplace, and about our staff are about another 10,000. Usually when we want to deploy people, there are language requirements. There are sometimes nationality requirements, because you need to get visas, etc. This was done more manually. But currently, we have actually incorporated, this whole thing for the last 3 years has been running on an AI platform. So if you need certain expertise for Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, Somalia, you name it, you feed it in, it machine reads, it's able to pull together the CVs of 5 or 6 people who would fit that profile. It has been now integrated with RPAs, robotic automated process automation, which actually, so it sends the emails on availability. It sends the CVs to the country offices in UNDP to say, here are the 5 CVs, select and rank them. All of this done is pretty much automated. There is a human interface, but I had a team of, now actually the team is 50% of what it was 3 years ago to do the same operations. I mean, if this is not efficiency, this is extreme efficiency in some sense. So both in terms of operational efficiency and programmatic efficiency, I think we are using more and more digital and AI tools, which is cutting costs and also accelerating the response and recovery, which actually has major reduction in human suffering as well as cost savings.
Thanks very much, Dave. And we're going to hit a pause button because someone has asked a question which is really important, which is, we've been talking about digital tech, but if communities don't even have access whether it's a smartphone, internet, or even digital literacy. Where do we start? So Dave, maybe you could just share a little bit about how UNDP and others are supporting access for those actually who don't even have a phone to begin with.
So, I mean, this panel is about digital, but at the end of the day, most of what is happening currently is in the humanitarian situation is still analog. Because I think we have not explored the full potential of digital, but you have very rudimentary challenges. If you are a mom who's thinking about how to feed the kids, or if you really do not know where to get access medicines, if you have no freedom of movement, if you have no access to information, these are traditional challenges that people face in the immediate humanitarian aftermath, right, after a crisis. So that's the beauty of it. We are not building everything on digital currently. And at the end of the day, we don't really need phones. I mean, you talked about cash transfers, unconditional cash transfers. There are lots of things that's been experimented, but the system is geared to actually run totally on analog currently, right? Access, information. We do lots of, still most of our assessments are done. SAT assessments, for instance, geospatial can accelerate it, but if not, we still have the capability to do human assessments. That's what we were doing all this time. So it's, at the end of the day, how digital is complementing and augmenting the work that we do on the ground. It's not about replacing it, and it's not about overtaking it. Currently, even if we want, it cannot be done. The technology is not there. And I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it'll ever be done, because at the end of the day, you cannot take the human out of the humanitarian response here.
Maybe if I were just to chime in, ultimately, digital tools, they are just tools. If it's not the right situation, don't use the wrong tool. The end user, the people on the ground, and the organic intelligence making the decisions need to make that judgment call on what tool to use. It could literally be a rope, a physical rope, and rather than some fanciful gadget.
Good point on tools, and I think also why digital literacy is very important, right? They say that if all you have in your toolbox is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And I think related to that is this question of then how do we ensure digital solutions are fit for purpose by local communities? And I think Swati, maybe you can also address the best practices for scaling digital humanitarian interventions that in a way supports the good work that's already being done by local communities.
So I think we have spoken about it in some form or the other since we have started. The solution is co-designed tech, right? I think Nama gave a great example of designing the maps that fit the community by involving the community, and I think that is a solution that we need. So you need to have inputs from the end users and everyone involved in the crisis response to build that tech. So what it does is it solves three things for us. One is the issue of adoption. So if I'm part of the solution, I know that the tech will work, so adoption becomes easy, right? And this also empowers the people to use that tech as an enabler to support whatever it is that they're doing with the relief or response. And it also does another thing, which is build ownership of the tech, right? It could be the simplest tool, it could be analog, digital, does not matter. It could be literally someone speaking over a loudspeaker or doing a radio spot or a TV spot to educate someone or whatever means necessary. But if you're empowered and you own the technology and you believe the solution works because you've co-designed it, it will help you get somewhere better than where you are. And you also need to close this with transparency and feedback loops. So what you can do is say, hey, we have designed this because you told us what you want, and this is what it is doing. So always have a transparent communication about what the tech is doing. I think there's also a lot of, lack of knowledge around what tech does. It's a big word, but no one really knows what it does, right? So tech doesn't have to be complicated. You can simplify it, and you can teach people that the tech you use, that you're helping us build, is helping you back. And at the crux of it is you're not just scaling tech, you're also scaling relationships because you're building the communities into the tech. So effectively, you amplify the work that the people are doing on the ground rather than just focus on replacing the people who are doing it. So this is where I believe even though I'm from the tech space, that AI will never replace humans, because there are some things like that was spoken before by Dave, that the human is essential in the humanitarian response. So tech is just an enabler that will amplify it. So scale it, but co-design it.
It's comforting to know that AI is not going to replace any of us yet. Just a matter of time. Over to you, Nama. How about some successful examples of how digital tools or platforms have fostered more effective collaboration? I think we'll be talking about partnerships and the importance of that, especially with less and less resources. So if you can share some examples.
Could you repeat
Sure.
your question?
If you could share some examples of how digital tools or platforms have fostered more effective collaboration among multi-stakeholders.
Yeah, let me just build on to what I mentioned in the last response. Everywhere I go, in every meetings or conference, the partnership collaboration is, it turns out to be so vital, and it's true. So why do people collaborate? Why do organizations collaborate, and why do they hesitate to collaborate? So that's an extremely complicated question. But I would say, from our experience, if people have opportunity to participate, again, in the process, and if things are relatively open and transparent, we might be able to secure a better collaboration. So I can give a concrete example, because examples are helpful. So in 2015, Nepal got an earthquake, and I'm pretty sure you all know that. I had an opportunity to lead sort of the digital response in the forefront. So I'm trying to respond to your question, but with an example. We did two things. One is, again, the same mapping, the open street mapping, obviously because it's fast. After any major disaster, the geography becomes very different within a minute. All the buildings you saw, they have already fallen down. The roads that was passable is no more passable. It's not the same geography. It's not the same city. It's the same village. It's very different within a fraction of a minute. That means we have to collect this, this information very fast. As Dave mentioned, time compressed. Way. So one of the problems in the Nepal earthquake was that the earthquake hit many remote villages. In Nepal, I don't know, if you know the topography of Nepal, remote areas, sometimes you even have to walk a couple of days to reach to a particular village. And that's the reality. So, what we did was we designed and we developed a couple of digital tools. So one was what was called a Quake Map. It's simply the mobile app. We had no plan to develop this digital technology, by the way. After any major disaster, everybody wants to do something. I want to contribute. I want to help, And we also wanted to do that. So we developed the mobile app. It's 10 years ago, by the way. Technology was not as advanced as we have today. Interestingly, that tool became so popular, something we have never imagined. After disaster, lots of people are looking for information. Not only humanitarian actors. Lots of Nepalese were outside Nepal. They were also very interested. What happened to my village, to my families, kinds of thing. Everybody's coming to a site. So it's a mobile app that was given to communities, anybody who could just upload their need, by the way. Okay, what do you need in the village? You need food, you need medicine, you need there's somebody that needs to be taken to the hospital, You just open the mobile app, and it's very simple, and there are some menus you just select, and it also gives a geolocation, latitude and longitude, and that information comes to a central map that is open. Anybody does have access, by the way. That is how we have designed the system. Of course, you may have questions, in the villages there was no access to technology, the internet, kinds of things. But the interesting thing is that I could report the need for the village, on their behalf, even from Kathmandu, because I'm talking to my family in village in phone. Okay? They say, oh, we haven't got food for the last 3 days. And I just go to the map, in a web map, and then, and just put the report on their behalf. So anyway, let me not go into the technical detail. But now collaboration. During the first couple of days, nobody used the map, nobody used the information. But I think after 3 days or so, we was approached by Nepal Army. Because even Army, I was very surprised, even an organization like Army was looking for up-to-date information. Even Army doesn't have information because they are concentrated in district headquarters or in certain barracks. They cannot really go to every village, every house and collect information. That's a gigantic task even for big organizations. There is where that caps, leveraging the citizens' knowledge, because citizens are already there, right? For them, if we can design a right tool, and I use that word very meaningfully by the way, if the technology itself doesn't solve that problem, we have to design. If we design the tools in the right way, there is a tremendous potential for collaboration. These local citizens, for them it's just a minute, not even a minute, just to upload the information. They already know it. Just go to the web. Just for an external agency, it's very, very costly. So again, the collaboration. The Army started using that information from 3rd days, and it changed everything, the perception. When Army started using, everybody started to believe about the site. And then lots of people went and hit the site. The server was down, a lot of heat. We had to move the server. So I guess what I'm saying is there are many questions, by the way. I know there are probably the university faculty here, they still very interesting research questions, What made these different actors to collaborate, to use, in that situation, which is mediated by a very simple digital tool. The simple tool actually mediated collaboration. What are the factors? What's the motivation? I really don't know, But that was an excellent example of collaboration. So what I'm saying is, when there's information that's relevant to the situation, when people have, people know the process is open, and as I said again, the chances of collaboration is high. So I would conclude by saying one thing, by the way, before I pass it to you. So it's 10 years now, and there are so many disasters that has happened between 2015, Nepal earthquake, and now. Frankly speaking, I haven't seen a lot of development towards that direction. I expected that there will be a conversation, there will be research, that would be building those tools. And the tool we developed was very primitive, very simple at that time. There was a lot of opportunity to advance that tool, to advance that kind of conversation. That really hasn't happened. It's very interesting. That's a perfect example of localization, giving local community opportunity to participate in supplying their own information, collaboration. So that's my, that's one of the examples I can share. As I said, there's still open questions. When do people collaborate? When do not? How do we design the right kind of tools to promote collaboration? They're great questions. We do not fully understand. So I would really encourage not only the practitioners, but also if there are researchers to take up some of those questions. And I would be more than happy to have more discussion about them.
Thank you. It reminds me, when you talk about collaboration, of my time when I was being sent by my country to negotiate at the UN. I was negotiating 40 resolutions during the UN General Assembly. And you find that you just become a professional negotiator, right? You are negotiating an outcome. I think, Dr. Nolini, you're nodding your head. You can produce an outcome, right? But you don't actually always understand the situation on the ground. And so whatever you produce looks great in terms of asking for another working group or another committee, another report. But the question is it actually implementable, Is it meaningful? Is it sustainable? And through those questions that we were asking, one of the interesting platforms that I found is called the Frontline Negotiators. And it was set up by UN OCHA, the World Food Programme, and others, where they put together a community of practice of negotiators that were actually on the ground. So here was I now at the UN, whether when I was in New York or whether in Geneva, being able to access real-time information and stories from the people that were actually negotiating these issues on the ground, and to be able to then connect the dots so that whatever outcomes, right, that we were producing out at the UN was actually being used, right, by the community because their input had been brought in, or at the same time that there was ownership for them to take it forward. And so on this idea of both collaboration, there's a question here that asks, what can Singapore do more on? And I think, Lynette, I'm going to throw that question to you. But I'm going to give you a difficult one because I'm going to combine a few questions and pass that on to you. And related to this is a wake-up call again, thanks to Pigeonhole and the questions that you're asking, which is, how do we take whatever that we are discussing here on this panel forward so that it's not just an echo chamber? How do we ensure that there are next steps, right? So is this something that Singapore and others should be thinking about in investing in? Should we be investing more in innovation or more in operationalization of the tech? Should we be investing more in lobbying for more resources or getting those big institutions to open up access? What do you think, Lynette?
This is great. Thanks for the wonderful question. You're right, there are a few questions here. And before I say what can we do to take a next step forward, in fact, in quite a few conversations I was having, and we're not even halfway through the day, we've already exchanged great information about how we can help one another. Right, so for example, we talk about digital technology in this case, and I was able to share with some of you about different satellite and space companies that provide very good assistance, and because of how technology has evolved, very rapid response to provide intelligence to HADR. So I think how we could take this forward is, again, one-to-one, making every interaction impactful, and actually implicit in this is building trust. So they trust the information I get. I'm going to give them some data. They will contact the company. And then, of course, I think when it goes up to the higher platforms, there's the people on the ground, there are the professional negotiators, there are the policy makers, there are the lawmakers. So then everyone needs to come in, and rightfully that would need its own cadence and its own time and space to do that. But I think what we can do now is, again, coming back to hyperlocalization, really take every interaction and make it count, and they will create that critical mass. On the part about Singapore, it's very interesting how we spoke about lack of resources, technology. Do we focus on innovation? I think what we need to focus, and that is implied in every conversation and in every keynote speeches, is that we need to promote trust. And Singapore, like it or not, is a very, very trusted hub. Right, we have the Shangri-La Dialogue, we have many international platforms. We have the RHCC in the Changi Naval Base that house so many different nationalities, uniformed personnel. We have RSIS that provides thought leadership. So trust needs to be earned, and I think Singapore has earned it. And we hope more organizations do that. And I think that's where we need to build on from Singapore, in establishing that trust in these kind of forum, and in putting off, starting conversations on different policies. And then I go back again, right? So Singapore is a country to be a trusted hub for knowledge sharing, that we come here with a genuine, most sincere interest to make things better. And then the trust in individuals, in making sure individual actors are trusted, empowered to act. And then even trusting companies who are aligned in values, even though they could be for profit, but they are aligned in values in order to do good with the tools and capabilities that companies have. So if we are able to promote that kind of trust, we will unlock a lot of potential. I would say even so much more than what digital transformation can provide. Because inherently in all of us, there's a lot of potential to act. So maybe what we could take away, and maybe I leave this to RSIS and Dr. Alistair Cook and team, is perhaps instead of working on a SOP, standard operating procedure, we should work on a standard operating value. How do we each go on about in our work with a shared value? So depending on the situation, I don't have access to technology, but this is a value that we all espouse and we all share and we will act in that way. I'm a professional negotiator. I'm acting on this value. Maybe this is how we could move forward in establishing common shared value. Thanks.
Thank you. And that's homework for all of your SOV that you'll be negotiating in your tables next. I'm going to ask Swati a similar question, right? We talk about the issue of trust, and there are many questions coming out here in the Q&A saying, well, tech can be used for good, but also how do we manage the ethics of it? How do we manage the possible misuse of it? How do you balance to ensure that it's also socially beneficial? And so maybe from a corporate perspective, how do you think about these issues?
I think when we're building tech, we need to also focus on building information integrity into it, and that's a large part of it, right? So it's not just about building technology that works as a one-off. It's about saying, hey, I will have these trusted resources online all the time, and I will invest in technology that will keep it that way. So that's one part of it. Second, and can I just have the question again?
How do you manage the ethics and possible misuse? How do you ensure that we practice the principle of do no harm as we innovate, but also utilize and scale up digital tech?
I think there are two parts to it. It depends on the people who we're working with. I'll give you an example where we actually did this in reality. When we had the Ukraine conflict, Uber ended up becoming a public transport service. Why did we do it? There was no profit component. It was just the right thing to do. So again, something that Lynette mentioned, right? It's about what is right. So it's about doing the right thing. Everyone wants to do it. It's just that we need to have the right forum and the right place to do it. So we can leverage a lot of it if we are able to have those partnerships and conversations to get the right tech to the right place, to the right people. So this is one part of it. The other part is ethics. I think everyone inherently has, again, a lot of SOPs and frameworks, but when we need to do good, if we do follow a certain principle of doing good and the shared value, I think we'll all get there. Is it foolproof 100%? No, but we can get there. It's always a hope.
Thanks. And related question also to Dave, right? Now with humanitarian organizations digitalizing their operations, handling more sensitive data, and related to that, there are a couple of questions about, how do you protect the most vulnerable in the work that you do? What is UNDP or others, what are you seeing in terms of strengthening of posture and protecting operational integrity in affected communities?
I think data privacy as well as digital security, these are very important. And I think actually in our sector, this is a weak point, right? And I don't have all the answers, but I think there are a couple of things that we should do and we are trying to do. One is about designing with data privacy and some of these governance issues right from the start. So when you design things, you have to keep data privacy, for example, as well as cybersecurity right at the top of your mind. And often we don't do that. And I think most of the tools, even some examples that I'm sharing, honestly, when we built it, this was not our primary concern, right? But I think now it has shifted. We need to make that a primary concern, comparing to, for instance, the private sector. The second, I think, is most important is minimal data governance. This is very important. I think those in the academic field, we do have that, but when it comes to organizations, for instance, UNDP has its own data policy, retention, how long you can retention it, transferring of data. And often there are local governments in countries that we work or international norms that govern some of this, but in most fragile states, this doesn't exist in terms of local data privacy laws. So we have to adhere to some of these international norms, and we do have each organization has its standards. And the fourth, I would say, is capacity development. This is extremely important. I think people who work in our sector needs training, and it's also constant learning on digital privacy, cybersecurity, etc. right? Because even multi-factor authentication, some of these basics, I think it's very weak. And I think nowadays you can do many of these trainings cheaper, it's online, and this constant enhancing of capacity of our staff is needed. And this is also where maybe lots of collaboration private sector can take place, because this is one of the strengths that the private sector brings to the table, and they can help us. When it comes to data privacy and security, it's literally, and I don't want to exaggerate, but many people here are very experienced and can relate to it. It's a matter of life and death in the humanitarian field. You might lose your social security number, and there might be some identity theft or them financial losses, but if you are working in very fragile contexts, and then you are giving data about regimes, and there are autocratic regimes, and sometimes it's about gender-based violence, these kind of data privacy leaks can literally end one's life. So the responsibility is much, much higher in the humanitarian field when it comes to data privacy and also cybersecurity.
Thanks very much for sharing that. And you know, in the remaining minutes, I know that all of you are thinking about food for your tummies, but I'm going to ask the panelists to give you some food for thought. So just for 1 minute each, I'm going to just go down the panel to ask if they could just leave you with a food for thought on these ideas of digital humanitarianism as we look into the future. What is one thing that you would like the audience to think about? I'm going to start off with Swati and then head down that way.
I think one of my favorite things to talk about is misinformation and disinformation, and that's largely because it's very unexplored. And it's also to do with the fact that it falls under this gray area where we call it invisible warfare, right? Until it really directly impacts you, you're not going to do nothing about it because it's not conventional, you don't see the impact of it. So essentially, one of the things that the tech industry is trying to do is navigate mis and disinformation. How do we go about doing it, especially in a humanitarian context, is get the communities involved in the solution. How do you do it? Again, you build hyper-local content that teaches people to be a part of that solution. So identify misinformation, identify disinformation, and report it. Report it to the people who can do something about it. Again, coming to Nama's example, right? Report it to someone who can do something about it so that it can be a two-way communication. But more than that, also invest in protecting the trusted sites that you build. I'll give you the simplest example. If I know there's a cyclone coming and I see that on just a random social media app, the first thing I'm going to do is go check a trusted website, a government source or an official source to see if it's actually real. So what this tells me is trusted sources, we need to invest in them, which also means when we are building those technologies, we need to make sure we build for something to last. So essentially, when it comes to tackling mis or disinformation, it's not about debunking it once the information is out, it's about pre-bunking it as a strategy. So get the community involved in pre-bunking it and identifying what it is, so that at least we can have some sort of information grounded in reality, rather than just letting it go haywire. So yeah, that's something to think about. Thank you.
I believe that the people, the human, no matter whether they're in a remote village or any other, underprivileged settings, they need to be thought as an asset. What I hear in the humanitarian conversation is that, in that community, in that village, there is a need. Let's go and meet the need. That's true. But there is not only need in that community, there is also asset. These living, breathing humans, their network, their social capital. I think without engaging them, without leveraging that, there is no resilience. It's difficult for me to believe that. So again, now it brings us to a question of localization. But then now we have we've been talking about localization for some time, but how much of progress we have made? Sometimes what happens is we, look at the top-down planning versus participatory planning. Sometimes we do something new just because the existing thing is not working, but we don't really understand how that new thing works. And that's the kind of a situation we have. So we know the way we are doing humanitarian service, there is room to improve, And I think we more or less agree that we have to go more towards localization, but we really do not fully understand what we are talking about. When we talk about localization, there are lots of things. Localization is not one size fit all kinds of idea. It's very contextual. Localization in Singapore may mean one thing versus localization to a remote village in Bangladesh. It's entirely different things. So how do we operationalize this concept? What do we actually mean by localization? I think this is a great question. There's a huge space for us we have to work on that to advance this. I love this idea of localization. I'm a huge enthusiast, but at the same time, my experience tells that there are a number of questions that we did not fully understand. So we need to get a little deeper on that. One idea is, what are the interesting, useful local initiatives in the region? Well, we talk here. I'm pretty sure there are local communities. They are doing amazing things. In different parts of the region or world. Do we know that? No, we don't. So how do we identify? How do we recognize them? How do we cultivate those initiatives and support in technology, in resources? That would be a great starting point. But as I said, there are great research questions. There are great questions for conversations in this space. Let's do that. That would be my appeal to everybody here.
So we're out of time, so I'll make this really quick. And I think what we could really take away as a next step and food for thought is really coming back to the difficult question about building trust. How can we operationalize it? Not just look at it as a fantasy or an ideal we cannot arrive, but how can we take concrete steps to get there? Trust amongst comrades, trust amongst culture, countries, companies, and continents. How do we build that trust? And of course, while I'm a pathological optimist, I do understand we need to have guardrails. So while we are building that trust, what kind of minimal guardrails do we need to establish so that people who are vulnerable are also looked after and feel safe? That's what I would leave for you for lunch.
I'll also be short. There's the benefits now currently outweigh the risks when it comes to digital humanitarianism. So I think no challenge is small or big. Take it on. I think we have to try and keep innovating. And if we cannot do it, we need to fail fast. But I think if we do not tap into the potential that this provides in terms of increasing efficiency, effectiveness, and improving the people's lives, then we'll be left on the wayside. So we have to get on this train, and we need to move on with the world that's moving.
Great. Thanks very much. So from Dave, he has asked you to move quickly, invest early. From Lynette, we're talking about what are the concrete steps you all need to take to build trust, what are the guardrails we need to protect the vulnerable. From Nama, how can we map local initiatives and support that? Can we have a better understanding of what localization is? And from Swati, how can we invest more in trust building through our local communities and the expertise they have? So with that, can I ask that you give the panelists a round of applause?